Good to go when you are, Chair.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming along to tonight's EAP Future Communities. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just one apology from Councillor Smith.
Perfect, thank you. And are there any declarations of interest? Philip?
Yes, a theoretical interest in item 5, Wilby's relocation, because I'm a supply teacher and I could theoretically work at that school. But I think this is so hypothetical. I've not been asked to work there, so I will just declare my interest for the form of it.
No problem at all. We'll note it, Philip. Thank you. Okay, so the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September 2023, can I sign them as a true and accurate record? Philip?
Sorry, yeah, 1L for me, please, in my name. I'm in the list of apologies, but I apologise with 1L.
No apologies. Thank you very much. And so the rest of that is all okay? Excellent, perfect. Thank you. So we move on to item 4, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disability and Education Health and Care Plan update. I've got Neil down, but I do notice that Charlotte is online as well, who I think since our last meeting is now the interim head of SEND. Is that the correct title? I think it is, Charlotte.
It is, yes.
So I will hand over to you, Charlotte. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's a PowerPoint, Callum. Have you got that too?
I've not got one for this item. I'll just double check.
Callum, can I just ask? I've got somebody called Stanner as well.
Sorry.
It's Susan Tanner, isn't it?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Stanner.
Sorry, yes.
I'm sorry I'm late, Councillor Edwards, but I had issues with the Zoom link.
No problem. Thank you very much. Callum, I think you were looking for a presentation, right? Yes.
Yeah, just loading now.
Thank you. Thank you, that's the one, yeah. So thank you very much. So there was a report sent round with the agenda, and I don't propose to go through every section of that report, as I'm sure you've all had the opportunity to read that. But if you could just go to the next slide, Callum, please. Thank you. Just to kind of summarise some of the key points from that report. So in summary, there continues to be a very high volume of requests for statutory assessments for an education, health and care plan, which places pressure on all areas of the SEND system, and that pressure comes with it additional sort of costs, and not just pressures on the local authority, but on all areas that operate within SEND. The SEND services continue to invest in early help services, so we're trying to invest in early help now, which will hopefully help SEND in the longer term, in order to prevent some of those requests coming through, although we don't expect that to be a rapid sort of turnaround. And also to be able to help families at an earlier stage on their SEND journey, and hopefully kind of get them the support that they need at an earlier level. There's historically been a bit of lost faith in the system, I think, with some of the sector that the council has been working really hard to repair over the last couple of years. And relationships and engagement with the sector is a high priority for us, to ensure that we are working hard to secure those relationships with both the education sector, but also with families. There has been some instability also within the education, health and care team, due to kind of high turnaround of staffing, and some periods of time where we weren't recruiting, but we are now undergoing a permanent recruitment sort of structure over the next couple of months, and we think that will bring some much needed stability to the service, and then allow them to make sort of rapid developments, and that again remains one of our high priorities. So as you will have seen from the paper that was sent round, the increase in number of requests in the system, the increase of the number of young people that have got SEND in schools, and those who are requiring additional support through education, health and care plans, and then requiring the additional support through special school places, is placing financial strain also on the local authority, to the point where we are reaching a period where our high needs funding block is no longer sort of meeting those needs, and we're predicting a deficit in the budget. So if you could move on to the next slide, Callum, thank you. So this is just kind of about some of the considerations for this group, really, to have a think about how we can collectively work on solutions in order to improve this for families going forward. So within those questions, it's kind of to invite a wider discussion around SEND and ideas that the panel may have for how we can make improvements, bearing in mind the increase of requests that we have, but also alongside the funding difficulties that we're finding ourselves in. So part of that is, how do we change the current trend and trajectory of SEND, and to allow for children who have SEND to be well educated and have their needs met within their local community? Because what we know is, if children need to go to a special school, that is often not within their local community. And sometimes if we've got capacity difficulties with our special schools, and we need to use independent schools as opposed to ones that are sort of maintained by the local authority, etc., then we know that they may have to then sort of move out of their local community in order to be able to have their needs met. So how do we go about changing that trajectory, changing that trend? The second question is around, how can we invest more in early help, given that we have financial restraints, but knowing that those earlier help things will help us in the longer term? So how do we shift that balance of investing earlier when we're facing those financial restraints? The next question is about how we can influence the EHC assessment system to ensure that all of the partners that are involved in that assessment provide timeliness of advice. So ensuring that those advices coming back in time or not coming back in time doesn't act as a barrier to completing the process within the 20 weeks that we're given, and being able to name a school. How do we improve the quality of education, health and care plans that are in the systems that we currently have in place? So we have over 3,700 education, health and care plans. We know we need to improve the quality of those. How do we go about tackling that improvement of quality based on the templates and stuff that we have at the moment? And how can we continue to improve our relationships with families and with the sector? So those are the kind of the broad spectrum of questions that I wanted to bring today, as well as, if you've got any other questions that have come from the paper that was circulated, happy to answer any of those. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, there we are. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you very much for that presentation. Callum, can you just take the screen, because I can't see everybody? Can you take? Thank you very much. Perfect. Thank you. So these are the questions that Charlotte and her team are looking at, and it'd be great if we can give some suggestions and responses to those going back to that. I think it's important to say that, you know, the great work that the team have done in the past 18 or so months, from where we were to, you know, having just over I think it was 3% rate of EHCPs being responded to in 20 weeks to now, I think it's just about 70%, isn't it now? Which is a fantastic result, but there is a little more to do, and I know that the team are working on that. And I think what Charlotte was saying about the team becoming more permanent as opposed to being kind of temporary workers will help relieve that. So it would be good to get some responses around those questions that Charlotte has asked, to help the system and, ultimately help our families and children with SEND issues. So I've got Wendy, please.
Sorry, you've got to get used to what's where on Zoom rather than Teams. Yeah, just from experience as a parent, I do think early help's really important for children who have any additional needs, and sometimes it's really not much that needs to be done if a parent knows what they need to be doing with the child to help the child. But if you're waiting a long time to get any help or banging your head against a brick wall, it can exacerbate the problem because the child isn't getting the help they need, and it doesn't take much. I'm talking from experience of speech therapy, and at one of my children, I took speech therapy, and once I did a lot of the exercises, so we really didn't see the speech therapist only about 3 times, but it just was made so much easier once the parent knows what they need to do. So I do think early help is enormously beneficial, and in the long run would save money and time.
Thank you, Wendy. So I think you covered kind of 2 things there, actually. So the early help, but also about the communication with families, which was covered. And I know that we've done a great job in actually reaching out to families, and we have the forgive me if I call it wrong, it's something like the Parent Carer Forum, isn't it, that deals with or looks at the SEND issues, and I think that's been hugely positive, certainly over the past year, and to see more of that, because actually it's about the parents looking at what they can do to support, as well as the educational system, as well as SEND IAS as well. So I think you've raised two good points there, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, can I just come back quickly? I did, because I noted the Meet the Team parent events. I think, are excellent idea. Really
yeah, and I think they were actually really popular and quite, and in fact, some of them I think were oversubscribed, which is really positive. So I think more of those would be great. And I think also kind of reacting to what they're saying. So I think sometimes we have these, not necessarily in this sector, but we have forums where we listen, but then don't react to what they're saying. And I think that's what is happening, certainly in this sector. That'd be good. So I've got Jean, please.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Wendy, I agree with you. It's that early intervention. And I'm presuming that there's an increase in children that were affected by COVID, children coming into early years and primary, that didn't get that early intervention, such as speech and language and ed psych assessments done. When in my experience of talking to parents, they do feel very frustrated, because obviously they're at the sharp end, aren't they, and trying to do the best for their children. And a lot of parents have said it's the communication barriers that break down, trying to get through to speak to people, and then sometimes emotions are very fraught, aren't they, and they don't feel they always get the best response from officers. And also from the school's point of view, I've got members of my family that work in both primary and secondary education, and the schools are on the sharp end, aren't they? They're the ones, that are having to deal with children that are picking off on a daily basis, and how we work together there to build a better relationship, so that the children get the help that they need, and the schools and parents get the help that they need to support the children.
Thank you, Jean. And I think, again, you raise a very good point, particularly about the schools, because it is about that wraparound support that they have. because we know for a lot of SEND children, the best place for them is in mainstream education, where they can be with their peers, where they can be with their community. But it is about that wraparound support, and it is about communicating with the schools and supporting the schools. And I think history would say that, you know, that was something that we weren't great at, but it's certainly something I know that is improving. I think we have a newsletter that goes out. Is that right, Charlotte or Neil, that goes to the schools now around that?
Yeah, so we have a head teachers newsletter that goes out weekly that has SEND updates in it. We also have a SENCO newsletter specifically around SEND and changes in processes and things like that. We hold SENCO forums, we hold SENCO training. And we are doing a lot more than we ever have done to engage with the sector. And I think the points around early help are really very valid, and we have invested in early help over the last year, whereas we didn't have that level of investment in early help before. But we know with early help, it takes quite a while for you to see the impact of that. We're not going to see a sudden reduction in the requests for statutory assessments now, because these are children that probably could have done with early help 5 years ago, for example. So we don't expect to see instant results from that, but the feedback that we're getting is it's very positively received by schools, and it's about building their understanding and capacity. So our early help support comes from specialist teachers in some of our special schools, and it's about improving the understanding of the school sector so they know what to look for, or they know how to support a child when they're in particular sort of crisis situations. So it is good, but really we would like to do more of it if we're going to make a success. And the early help that we can provide is in a certain amount of areas, but obviously with an education, health and care plan, there is a health element to it, there is a social and care element to it that we're not necessarily always in control of. And it's kind of how we build all of those wraparound services that span across different organisations that offer that. How can we get some earlier help from those services as well?
I can just come back there, Chair.
Absolutely, Jean. Yeah,
I fully understand that. I think it's when the children are in that state of limbo before they get their care plans in place, and the schools haven't got the help there to manage those children. That's when difficulties arise, and it's I don't know how we can bridge that gap, you know, in helping children that are in that state of limbo.
I could come back on that, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Charlotte.
Yeah, so we have something called early help locality funding that again has been in place for about 18 months now. So schools can apply for additional funding to the local authority to help bridge that gap. So the idea of the early help locality funding is to provide schools with the financial resource to put in interventions prior to the need for an education, health and care plan. And they might repeat those interventions over the course of 6 months. And at that point, if then there's still that need, it's still not successful, that's when we would be advising to make the application for an education, health and care plan. So that's relatively new, but we have had lots of successful applications for that over the last 18 months, and schools are utilising that support well.
So just one more thing.
Yeah, no worries, Jean.
Sorry
Yeah,
to hope. It's also, you know, when I've been looking and trying to understand why there's been such an increase in children needing extra help, it seems to be more linked with the social side and more than should we say traditional things like autism and ADHD and stuff like that. Seems to be more of a social problem that are coming through. That's just my observation. I don't know if there's.
Yeah, am I okay to come back, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely, Charlotte. Yeah.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. The trend of requests for statutory assessment are absolutely growing in the areas of speech, language and communication, which eventually, for some cases, leads to a diagnosis of autism. That's both of those are significantly growing trends over the last probably 10 years or so, but particularly over the last sort of 5 years or so. But also for children who are experiencing difficulties with social, emotional, and mental health difficulties, again, is a growing trend of a reason that that they're requesting those statutory assessments. So I completely agree with those points.
Perfect, thank you. I've got David next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't steal too much airtime from councillors on this. I think some of those points are, really pertinent in that sense. And if we do think there's a cohort of very young children that didn't have the same opportunity of going to nursery playgroups, maybe the parents were furloughed and they stayed at home with them, but didn't get that opportunity to socialise with others in the same way, in those really important early development years, then we are going to see a little bit of a bulge of that coming through. And what we're really keen to do, and we've started those discussions across Northamptonshire around early help offers, is about trying to shift from that universal plus offer to, well, what's the universal offer? How do we get that information out there that enables people to connect in the right way, so that if your child is struggling with socializing with other children and spending time with them, then what are the groups that are already out there and already doing this, and how do we connect you to them so that you don't need to get to necessarily that point? You can address those issues early on. So alongside some of that more those interventions that are required, is about trying to get ahead of that curve again and stop people needing those referrals in the first place. So how do we connect up? How do we make sure parents are supported? But how do we make sure that organisations that are struggling with managing that demand knows what's out there as well? I think there's been a bit of a shift over the past few years, and we need to sort of re-establish some of that, which a lot of our early discussions around the development of our early help workshops and developing that offer moving forward have sort of focused on. So I agree with the points that are being made. I think there is something around awareness as well, and knowing how to ask for things. But I think in all demand areas, what we do see is people thinking that there is something that's needed, when in reality, and trying to tick the boxes to get that, when in reality it might not be that. So one example that I use is one of my children used to have glue ear a lot and struggled with their hearing, and we were waiting for audiology, and their speech perhaps wasn't developing as well as you would have wanted to. So if we defaulted to the professional side of things, that would have been, well, let's get a referral to speech and language. But we got connected to signing classes, so infant signing classes, which were readily available in our local community, which actually enabled us to communicate in a different way whilst we were sorting out the glue ear issues and grommets and whatnot. So development didn't get affected in the same way, because we got connected to something which helped us manage that need differently, which wasn't a speech and language therapy assessment in that sense. It was just something readily available.
Superb, thank you, David. And I think, again, you raise a good point there about, other organisations and groups that do things. And I know kind of one of my local churches in Kettering, they have a monthly session where SEND parents can get together with their children and kind of talk to each other and share their lives, I guess. And I think there's other organisations out there that kind of do that. So actually, if we could create a database of these things that we can share with our parents, that would be a good thing. Lee.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm looking at this from a sort of a logical way, really. So how do we change the current trend, or what is it? So David said there that that there could be a COVID bulge. Is that true? I mean, what are the trends over the last 10? I'm sure it's had an effect. But what is the trend over the last 10 years? Are we actually seeing an increase every year? Have we seen an increase every year for the last decade on the number of children needing SEND? If so, COVID's had an impact, but it isn't the only reason. In which case, what does the modelling look like for the next 10 years? Are we going to? So Charlotte made an interesting point there that we're seeing more children come forward with autism. Now, if that's correct, then surely are we expecting to see a constant increase of children being diagnosed with autism? And if so, it changes the answer to the question of how do we change the current trend, because we've got to look at what the cause of the trend is. I think probably here. It's difficult, isn't it? Because if I presume that we're following the national trend here, I presume that Northampton isn't sort of an outlier. So if we're following the national trend, and actually, regardless of what we're doing, the number of children needing SEND is going to increase because the definition of autism is made wider, or more children are being tested, or whatever it may be, then actually it makes a difficult job that David and Charlotte and everybody's got almost impossible, because actually we don't control some of the reasons that these children need it in the first place. So I just wondering if we've done any if we've done any modelling, if we've looked at the last 10 years, and does that help predict what the next 10 years is going to be, not just in the number of children that need help, but in the finances that's going to be needed for it.
Super. Charlotte, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. North Northamptonshire is not an outlier. This is a national trend. And whilst we see that COVID has probably exacerbated some issues, this has been a trend that has been building over a very long period of time. We've had to do some modelling fairly recently for the DfE's SCAP return, which for the first time has included SEND children in that. And we had to just reasonably predict that the number of children with an education, health and care plan is going to go up by 10% a year, because that's the data that we have got for the last 6 or 7 years. When we look at data, sort of data across the region, it's very, very similar to what we're experiencing. So I think we're not going to be able to change the trend of the way that it's moving, absolutely. But what I think we probably need to think about is we have got a sort of financial resource in which we have got to carry out our duties for that. How can we change the trend of what we're doing with that now, which is operating kind of at the upper end of the system with the special school places and whatever else? How can we change what we're doing to better meet those continuing increase of needs with the pocket of finance that we have? That is the real challenge.
Okay, Chair, if I can just come back. Okay,
absolutely, Lee. Yeah,
Charlotte, that's really clear. That was the answer I feared you were going to give, because the challenge is huge, clearly. So I suppose it makes it all the more important what you were saying earlier about the interventions. I mean, the best thing for the council, the best thing for the children, the best thing for everybody, is that there's an intervention that stops the child actually needing an EHC, because we're finding them the support before they even get to that stage. But if those prior interventions don't work, it's a worrying trend, because it's just going to need more money, more resources, and actually it's never ending. 10% annual increase is monstrous. I know that's absolutely useless. That doesn't help anybody, but it does paint a worrying picture.
Yeah. Charles, so just on that, so do we work with other authorities to kind of see what they are doing, and kind of get together? Is there kind of I don't know, an East Midlands area SEND board that?
Yes, there's quite a few mechanisms. There's East Midlands regional groups that meet to discuss SEND on a very regular basis, and there's lots of different strands to that we're engaged with. We also have a DfE SEND advisor that comes and looks at us and looks at specific pieces of work that we might want to address, and we'll be able to advise on what other areas are doing that have been able to address those areas. So we are constantly trying to work with other authorities to understand. Again, we're not unique. Most authorities are struggling to meet need within the sort of financial resource that they have. But I still think in North Northampton, we are on a development journey. Like you said, we've made a lot of progress over the last 18 months. We know we've still got further that we can go with that. So yeah, we are utilising the expertise of others to help us on that journey.
Superb. Thank you, Charlotte. I've got Philip, please.
Thank you, Chair. Got quite a few sort of little points and medium-sized points. Well, I'll just start talking. And yeah, first of all, just to address what Councillor Wilkes was just asking about the COVID bulge and how real is that? And I think it probably is very real, because SEND children, for example, are very typically born in the summer. They end up with diagnoses of special needs because they've come to things late. And I think it's the same with COVID. Those children who maybe weren't fully supported by their parents during the periods of lockdown might very well have missed out on some months, which will take years to catch up on. So I do believe in that COVID bulge. I think it's probably true. The other thing that Councillor Wilkes mentioned, which I wanted to comment on, was about autism and the increases in diagnoses. And I think this might even be a global phenomenon. I think it's partly that more is known about autism as a spectrum, and also, I don't know, I've detected a little bit of a cachet sometimes on social media with people saying that they are autistic or their child is autistic. It's almost as if they want that to explain other things. So people might actually want diagnoses of autism. I don't know how true that is. I've got no data to back that up, but it's a thought about whether that's, I mean, there can't be any more autistic people now than there were 100 years ago, can there really? So there's other factors at play there. The next question I have is really just about the document that we were given, page 18. I just want to understand this. It says 30 decisions of no to assess were also made. That seems, it's just a strange expression to me. I was wondering whether does that mean that there were 30 decisions where the NNC declined to assess a child, perhaps because there wasn't enough evidence there? Is that what it means?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So in the 20-week process, there's several stages of decision making. The first stage of decision making, which is usually done around 4 weeks or so, of the is to look at the evidence that's come in and to say, is there enough evidence here to suggest that the child may have special educational needs, because that is the legal threshold, may have special educational needs, and to make a yes/no decision. Usually, the decision for no is because it's been a parental request to ask for an education, health and care assessment, and it hasn't come with any information from the school. So it is very difficult to say, based on the parental request, that the child may have special educational needs. So usually it would be a no, please can you engage with the school and gather that evidence and come back. But sometimes there might be some other reasons, but that's typically the reason where there's a no to assess.
Okay. Would these parents have generally got that? They would have gone through the school all the same, wouldn't they? And got some measure of support from the school, but maybe the school has been pressured, do you think, to?
Yeah, I think there's some instances where the parent feels that there is special educational need, but the school disagrees. The school feels that the need can be met by the school in a universal way, and the parent disagrees with that, so the parent does it by themselves. I think sometimes there is the school is saying, okay, I can see what you're saying, but just not yet. Give us a bit more time doing these interventions. But the parent doesn't want to wait for that time for a variety of reasons. And sometimes potentially there's a communication disconnect between the school and the parent that causes the parent to go off in their own route. Okay,
that's interesting. Thank you. Because that comes back to the communication issue that you're trying to address as well. Yes, that's interesting.
Charlotte, can I just ask the follow-up question from that? So, if a child is elected home educated, how do then they deal with the EHCP if it's come from parental?
Yeah, so usually if they're electively home educated, that the parent will be doing some education with them, so they would be able to share the assessments around how that child is learning.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, can I continue, Chair?
Sorry, Philip. Yes.
No, that's fine. Okay, Charlotte, I don't know if you're going to have this information to hand, but I'd be very interested if you can tell me what would be the cost difference, purely in terms of money, between having a child supported one-to-one within their school or being sent to a special school. Is it more expensive to send a child to specialist provision than to provide one-to-one?
Yes, it is, and I think Neil might be better at giving you better figures than I can, probably off the top of my head.
Yeah, happy to come in, Chair, if that's okay. So,
yeah,
so the answer is absolutely. Schools within their delegated budgets get resource which they contribute to meeting the needs of children with special educational needs, called the notional SEN budget, and so they're contributing to some of the cost of that one-to-one support that is being delivered within a mainstream setting, and we then provide them with what's called a top-up over and above that so that they can meet needs. What we're trying to steer away from now is defining the support too tightly about what schools need to deliver. So rather than saying this child needs one-to-one support, we would say this is the sort of support the child needs, and the school can then be creative with their budget, with their resources, to deliver that support in the most effective way possible to meet that child's needs, rather than say, otherwise you can end up, as you can imagine, one class you end up with 3 or 4 one-to-ones, you know, which kind of doesn't work as well as, you know, if you took a more rounded approach. So that's what we're trying to do. But in terms of the straightforward money question, absolutely, we would top up funding for children within an HCP in a mainstream school. For a specialist placement in a local maintained special school, we're probably talking £20,000 to £30,000 depending on need, and if it's an independent provider, anything up to £60,000 to £80,000 for an independent provider for depending on need again. So there is a really big range in terms of that, and the most important thing, as you'll be aware, Councillor, is children who achieve the best outcomes do so by being around their peers, you know, and it just, you know, the mainstream setting is the best setting to deliver the best outcomes to children. Wherever that's possible, there will always be children who need a different setting, but where it's possible to, we want to maintain them within their peers, within their mainstream setting, and that gives them the best chance to deliver the best outcomes going forward.
Okay. I've just got one more question, Chair, if that's okay.
No problem, Philip.
Yeah. Purely, the actual mechanics of writing an EHCP. I would imagine that school teachers, the teachers are involved to a great extent. The SENCO at school is involved to a great extent, but obviously it will take people from your department time to do it. What are the man or person hours involved in an EHCP?
I suppose it's quite difficult to quantify because it would depend on how many agencies are involved. But as part of the process, if the EHC team, or not the team, sorry, if the panel, because it's made up of a panel of multiple agency professionals, if the panel decide that the child needs an assessment, then that assessment process begins. And it begins by going out to any professional that might have information on the child to ask for advices to be sent back in. So that means an educational psychologist will go out and see the child. It means that health will be consulted with. It means that social care will be consulted with. The school SENCO will be consulted with. And all of those write their professional advices, which then come back into the local authority. The local authority then pull those advices together into a plan. But it's not the local authority that decide what goes in the plan. They are just the sort of collators of the information and make it in a sort of put it in a bit of a story as such.
Okay.
So in terms of hours, I think it would really, really depend on how many agencies were involved with that child. If they had some complex health issues alongside learning difficulties, then there might be multiple health professionals that contribute towards that as well. I think the DfE have estimated that a plan to assess a child for a plan costs around £6,000 to £7,000 per assessment, is their estimation. I'm not sure exactly how they went about working that figure out, but that is their estimation of how much an assessment costs each time the multi-agency team needs to do that.
That's interesting. If we divided that by some sort of hourly rate, I dare say would be put in the hundreds of hours. So it's I think I'm impressed you get any done at all. It's yeah. Thank you very much. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Philip. Macaulay.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so Charlotte, Jean asked you a question earlier on about early intervention in schools, and you mentioned that you obviously reach out to teachers, provide sort of training, how they sort of help manage children with SEND. On the topic of how we can sort of invest more efficiently, do you think targeting those training provisions and those funding pots, as you referred to, that the schools can access, is one of the better ways in which we can address early intervention, specifically in schools?
Sorry, can you just repeat the last part of that question again?
Yes. So you mentioned that obviously there was a funding pot that schools can access. Do you think that having continuing to sort of prioritise those sort of accessible funds, so students, teachers can access them and they can learn and train in how to better sort of prioritise the SEND students? Do you think is that something you're aiming to prioritise with the limited budget in the future?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that budget is available to schools, because it's a recognition that the child needs something additional to what the school can offer as a sort of universal offer, but it doesn't need to be outside of or anything like that. So they would use that budget to put in place specific interventions, which might be to take the child, for example, who is struggling with their reading outside of the classroom with a trained teacher for half an hour a day, each day, up until the point that child was able to make the progress and catch up. And the school will require some level of additional funding for higher level cost interventions. That, coupled with the outreach services will be able to provide schools advice on specific interventions that work well. They'll be able to help sort of train the staff around what good interventions can look like because of their expertise that they have. So the two of those things combined together are a positive element. I'll take your point around the budget, because it's not an infinite resource at the moment. I wouldn't say that the requests that we're getting in for that are where the main pressures in the budget lie. We are getting a lot of requests for that, and that is a significant chunk of money, but it's not where the pressures in the budget lie particularly. It's not the thing that we're worried is kind of tipping the budget over the edge. It's more the placement costs of these very costly independent special school places that are the thing that are putting the most pressure on the budget.
But that's why, if we were, do you not think by prioritizing sort of training the actual teachers in the schools and doing it on an internal level, you can then try and reduce the amount of students you're sending over to obviously the outside schools, which are very much expensive, as you addressed in the previous questions.
Yeah, and I think that earlier intervention is where we need to focus, and what kind of those of us who are working in the sector all the time would kind of recognise is teacher training does not cover in any sort of adequate way how to teach children with SEND. Even the SENCO qualification doesn't really provide teachers what it is that they need. Now, we work together as a whole sector, and Joe, you might want to come in here as well, but we work together as a whole sector in how we support our schools to improve. And we've got some weight in that, being the local authority telling the schools what they need to do. But with some schools being academies, etc., we can't dictate what training that they need to have, etc. So it's a bit of a balance of them sort of requesting our support and our help, and us being able to utilise that and do that, and us being able to kind of say, we think you might need to look in this area. But training around SEND in general is not built into teacher training in the way that it really should be. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And then obviously, if you want, like it's been spoke about numerous times, best places for SEND students to be is surrounded by other peers and friends. And if you want to keep it that way, is obviously the funding has to go to the teachers. So I assume that that's well advertised then to all the schools and how they can access that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Neil, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments on things that have been said, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Firstly, I think we spoke about communication, and we are aware that councillors, you will be getting, the queries you'll be getting are about communication with the team. And colleagues, be aware we've invested heavily in the team to move forward. You can see that through the number of EHCPs on time and those other things that we've got there. But we are absolutely focused on communication, and we talked about the meetings that we put in place and meet the team, which I agree with the comment that was made is really positive. Just one thing I want to say on that is to give the panel an idea. You know, even with that investment, the caseload for a caseworker is about 200. You know, so they're working with 200 children, or not 200 families, because there might be more than one child in a family, but 200 children. It's a significant number, and they have to work through the annual reviews and the assessment process and those sorts of things. So there's still a big draw on the team's time, and we really do want to focus on communication, and we do hear that. So I just wanted to reassure members that we hear that coming through. The next thing I wanted to say was about DFE support or otherwise. As members will be aware, we are moving into a position where our DSG will be in deficit for the first time, and that means that we will be coming under greater scrutiny from the DFE. We have to complete something called a management plan, and so that support that we get through the DFE advisor will be increased, and they will be looking at the mitigating actions we're taking in place from a financial perspective, and supporting and advising of other things that we can do. So that support will come, and we will become under considerably greater scrutiny, I think, for that. And obviously we can share the management plan with the panel in a future date, so you can see what the what that includes and what the DFE. Now, I don't think the DFE are going to arrive with a magic bullet that's going to fix the problem, but what they might do is be able to point us in the right direction. Say there's local authorities in other parts of the country that have got a really great piece of work, and we'll want to pick that up. The final thing I wanted to say was in relation to the data that was shared, and particularly around the EAP advices, and members of the panel will know that education psychology is an area where it's difficult to recruit, and we are looking at different models for delivery and those sorts of things. And the percentage of EAP advice at the time remains quite low, at about just under 20%. I do want to say, though, that the EPs have worked really hard. They've addressed a huge backlog and caught up a very long way from where they were historically. And most of the advices aren't, 3 months beyond their timeline. They're a week, a few days, a couple of weeks beyond. And, they've made a really significant difference. And I just want to say that because I know members will be aware from previous conversations about the difficulties we've had with capacity in the education psychology service. And I just want to recognise the efforts the team have made to get a very long way that perhaps isn't reflected in the data in quite the way that is fair to the efforts they've put in. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Neil. And I think you're absolutely right. Data doesn't always reflect it, but you need to know the kind of the behind the scenes work, and also the historical part of it, so where they've come from to where they are now. So no, thank you very much for raising that. Jean.
Thank you. Picking up on that point, Neil, I know in education it's difficult times to recruit to. What is the deficit in the team at the moment? And if the team was working at full capacity, you're fully recruited, would that help? And I'm sure it would, in reducing the costs, and it would obviously improve the assessments. And just another comment, if I may, Chair, picking up on Lee's point earlier about the increase in the number of children being diagnosed with autism. I was speaking to a speech and language practitioner quite recently who said there is research that shows the increase in the amount of IT that the parents and that are using, mobile phones, has impacted on the infant brain. I don't know, Charlotte, if you've got any information on that, but there is research out there that does show that it almost causes a pseudo autism. It's not. Do you follow what I'm saying? That the lack of social interaction between parents and children from birth is impacted on the infant brain.
Shall I pick up the education
Sorry to
psychology?
waffle on, Chair, but
Sorry. Shall I
No
pick up the
problem.
education
Neil,
psychology
did you
question
want
first,
to-
Charlotte, and then
Yeah.
hand over? So what you'll see is, despite the education psychology advices being low at 17%, the actual completion of the HCPs on time is way above national average. National average is about 56%, and we're operating at between 70 and 80% most of the time. So, as I said before, even though they're a bit late, they're not very, very late in causing the HCPs to go beyond their timeline. That's important. A decision was made some time ago by the council to make more use of associate education psychologists that we get in through agencies to support our team. And that's ongoing, and it's due for review at the end of the year to look at how that's working. It's fair to say the agencies struggle to provide the level of capacity that we would like them to, particularly local capacity, but they are able to supplement our team. And so we need to look at that in the round. And one of the things Charlotte's worked on recently is how we ensure we retain our trainee education psychologists. Generally, we train have 2 education psychologists a year that go on a 3-year course, and at the end of that, clearly we want to retain them within our services to continue to work and increase the capacity that way. So that's something we're absolutely doing. And then, like I say, through the review of the commissioned approach that we've been taking to this point in December, we can take a look again at the overall number of education psychologists that we need at the moment. But at the moment, it's not the limiting factor on the HCPs, because as you can see, we're still keeping those at a high level. And like I say, the team are working really hard to support us in that.
Thank you, Neil. Charlotte, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just I mean, it's an interesting comment around the diagnosis of autism and links to kind of modern day living. I'm by no means an expert in autism, so I wouldn't want to comment on somebody else's research. But what we do know is that the presentation of autism and the presentation of trauma can present themselves in very, very similar ways. And those young people who have suffered trauma in their early childhood, even pre-birth, even trauma in the womb, can have those impacts on how they present themselves, which makes them come across in a way where others might think that they're coming across with ASD type symptoms. So I think there's a combination of lots of different things at the moment, and trauma it's still relatively misunderstood, I would suggest, across the education sector and across communities in general. And I think that response to trauma, which requires a very different response to a child just choosing to misbehave, for example, it is often something that can't help and can lead to further complications later on down the line. But yeah, I'm sure there probably is something in it, but I couldn't comment on their research.
Thank you, Charlotte. Lee.
Thanks, Joe. I wasn't going to come back with a second comment, but so I was really interested in what Councillor Addison was saying and what Charlotte's followed up. So presumably, I'm going to say something now that I'm sure all of the experts in the room, and clearly I am absolutely not an expert, I'm sure all the experts in the room are going to say, yeah, we've been saying this for years. But at the rate of increase, and I don't just want to focus on autism, but it's the easiest one just to pick out. So I'm just looking at the Institute of Psychology says there's a 787% increase in the last 20 years in people diagnosed, and they expect it to keep rising. So at some stage, I guess special educational needs are going to become normal educational needs, because actually there's going to be such an increase, it's going to be the norm within schools. So how frustrating must it be for Charlotte and Neil and the team that actually the change that needs to be made is in the training of teachers, because it's easier, I guess, for a school to recognise there's an educational need that's slightly outside of the scope of the teacher's training, and they just pass it straight over. So it's going to be never increasing, it seems. I mean, that early intervention seems priceless, because without that, it's going to be exponential. And if we've had 400 extra students in the last 12 months that have been where an EHCP's been requested, if that 5,000 or 6,000 pounds per plan, you know, is even remotely accurate, £2.5 million. Then if they all need extra support, 40-50 million pounds, you run out of money, don't you? So it's I just don't see how it ends other than the early intervention. But that long ramble does end up in a question. What percentage of EHCP requests that we get, what percentage of requests actually end up in a plan? So how many, Charlotte said that you get these no assesses, but even the ones that we do assess, how many of them are assessed and turned down? What's the percentage that go through?
Charlotte?
I could find that for you exactly if you give me a moment, although just to give you a bit of a flavour, over the last quarter, this was in the schools forum earlier, 2 seconds. So over the last quarter, we did 200 and I think it was 215 assessments. 213 assessments over the last quarter, of which 186 resulted in an education, health and care plan. So it's a very high percentage.
Wow. Okay. Thanks. I only ask these questions because actually the budgetary pressures here are huge, and they're not dropping unless something fundamentally changes with how schools refer, make those requests, or is it how people are diagnosed. The budgetary pressures are going to be, well, massive, breaking point.
Yeah. Neil.
Yeah, just two quick points on that. I mean, on that last point, I mean, clearly what we would want is the early help and triage to be in place to ensure that if an assessment is requested, it's really needed. So we really want to avoid, we want to avoid unnecessary requests coming through when actually they should be going somewhere else, because that's generally the case. Is actually this child doesn't need an assessment, but they probably do need early help of some other form, and we need to be doing that proactively rather than waiting to bounce back out of the system. So you'd want that figure to be really, really high. The other comment I was going to make is sort of similar, really, in that, we talk about, I know we're talking there about, training for teachers and all those sorts of things, but the support that we can give families to help themselves is so important. Parents, really, really want to do the right thing. Of course, they want to do the right thing for their children, and it's a real partnership. And that's absolutely what the education and healthcare process and the early help process needs to be about, is how we can all work together to get the right support at the right time to the right pupils. And that key to that is obviously parents feeling confident that they can manage needs and identify needs and be supported and reach out and get support when they need it. So I think that's really, really important as well.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back?
Absolutely,
on
Lee. Yeah.
And Neil, I suppose that's almost my worry. So we're looking at how can we change the current trend. So if what we're saying is that we want schools to request EHCPs less often, we want them to find other ways of solving the problem. I could appreciate that, except that we're saying that 85% of all EHCPs that are requested, actually, we agree with them that there is a need for it, based on 213 assessed, 180, whatever it was that were agreed with. So we're trying to stop the schools requesting them, but actually we ourselves are saying that 85% of those requests actually are valid. So it's trying to work out how do we change the current trends there? It's where do we make the change?
Yeah, if I can comment on that, Chair. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, what we would want is those 15% not to go in and out of the system, but for the schools to go directly to the support that's needed. That's point one. The second thing is, if early help's effective, you'd hope the overall number would reduce because you'd intervene earlier than the statutory assessment is required. And one of the key things we need to do is ensure that we're clear that the purpose of this is to put in place an intervention which enables a child not to need further help. It's turnaround. It's what support catch up or whatever that might look like. That means they once again are working at a level with their peers in a mainstream school, working effectively. An EHCP is not something that sits with you for life necessarily. Some children it will, quite rightly, and they will need support throughout their lives, their school lives. But for others, you know, you can go in, we can do an intervention with the schools as a partnership with the family, and actually, you know, that can then be managed within a mainstream setting very successfully. So that's what we need to be looking to do, I think.
Superb, thank you. Charlotte, do you think you've got a good kind of response to your questions and comments?
Yeah, I think there's some great conversations there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think that's been a really good conversation and talk about it, and that's great. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating in that. So item 5 is the Wilby primary school relocation to the Glenvale Park development in Wellingborough. This has come to us before, and I think Marsha's going to bring back now the results of the consultation.
Yeah, I'm just going to do a very brief intro, if that's all right, Chair, and then hand over to Marsha.
Yeah, of course you can. Yep.
So just to give members a brief reminder, Wilby is a small school with a PAN, an admission number of 13, and through a rigorous selection process, they put forward a proposal that they move to the new Glenvale Park school site, and were successful. And so we came to this panel previously with that as a proposal for comments before a public consultation was undertaken, and that public consultation is now complete. Marsha will run through the outcomes of that with you, and we'd then like to gather any comments or thoughts you have prior to this going to the next executive for a decision, at which point that's the final point of that process. And if that were to be, yes, we're going to proceed, the school would continue with the move and open on the new site in September 2024. So just want to be clear about the reason why we're here. As Councillor Edwards says, you've seen this before, but this is with the outcome of the consultation with a view to taking an informed paper to executive next week, I think, or maybe the week after, where the decision will be made about whether the proposal to move Wilby to the Glenvale site will be accepted. But like I say, Marsha's going to go through a very brief presentation with the outcomes, and we'd be really appreciative of your comments and thoughts.
Perfect. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Marsha. Joe, I can see you talking, but I can't hear you. Have we lost you and Marsha? Joe, we have lost Marsha altogether.
Okay, Chair. Have we got the presentation to share, please?
If
we put that
up now, yeah.
Then we'll get ready. I think Marsha will rejoin, hopefully. Excellent, thank you very much. Can we have that on slide view? Because I think it might be that's lovely, so people can read it. Right, we'll just wait a second, see if Marsha can rejoin the meeting.
Just joining back now.
Here we go.
Are you okay, Marsha?
I'm back in. Apologies.
No worries, thank you.
So thanks, Marsha. I've done a brief intro, so if you could just take us through the slides, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. So we had 204 respondents take part in the consultation, 202 via the online questionnaire and 2 via written responses. The documents that we published alongside the questionnaire was the FAQs document, which contained lots of information about the relocation and what it meant for parents, staff, and pupils, the EQ, the equality screening assessments, and the equality impact assessments. Next slide, please, Kellen. So this slide looks at the overview of the respondents that took part. So we had 2 pupils take part. 64 from the category of parent, carer, guardian, 17 members of staff, 1 member of the PTA, 2 Northamptonshire councillors, 5 town or parish councillors. Oh, let's move this. 26 residents of Wilby, 29 residents of Glenville Park, 7 local businesses, 4 members of staff at NNC, and 47 from the other category. And the other category was identified as local residents, wider family members, which also included former teachers, pupils, educational professionals, and it also included a respondent from a religious organisation. Next slide, please. So one of the questions was, to what extent do you support or oppose the proposal? And we had overwhelming support. So we had 58.2% from the parent carer group, 92.3% from the staff and the PTA group, and 61.2% from all other respondents. And you can see to the right that 40% from the parent carer guardian group opposed the proposal, and 33% from all other respondents opposed the proposal. Next slide, please, Callum. Okay, so this just gives you it's the same question, but it just breaks it down differently. So you can see that 63% of all respondents supported the proposal, and 33% tended to oppose or strongly oppose the proposal. Next slide, please, Callum. So this slide looks at the different themes to the consultation. So there was lots of written responses. So this just looks at the themes mainly from parents, carers and staff. So the theme is the section in the middle, and then to the right, it tells you how many comments were along that theme. So the first one you can see is a new school site would have benefits of a larger building and modern facilities. 28 respondents responded in this way, which is 70% of the total respondents to this question. The next one was a new school site would have more outdoor green space compared to the current site, which currently they have very, very little outdoor space at Wilby. 23 responded to this theme, which was 58% of the respondents to this question. Next one, a new school site would facilitate greater opportunities for pupils. 12 respondents to this theme, overall 30%. Next one, a move is preferable due to the current site being unfit for purpose. There were 10 responses to this theme, which is 25% of the respondents. A new school site would have more space for one-to-one learning and dedicated space for SEN students. 7 responses in this theme, which is 18% of the total responses. A move would allow better parking and access at the new sites and reduce traffic in Wilby Village. 5 comments were along this theme, which is 13% of the overall responses to this. A new school site would not require as much ongoing maintenance and associated costs. 4 comments along this theme, which was 10% of the overall responses. And then finally, a move would enable Wilby to maintain and improve its current academic strengths and reputation. 2 responses along this theme, which was 5% of the overall responses for this question. Next slide, please, Callum. So this theme was along the line asking what negative impact. So I should have said the slide before was positive impacts. This slide is looking at the negative impacts. So the same question as before, asking respondents to say whether they think the move would be negative. We looked at the themes from parents, carers and staff. And in the themes again, you'll see concerns about transport to and from Wilby to the new site. 17 responses along this theme, which has amounted to 65% of the overall comments on this theme. Concerns that the new school site would be too large and lose the character of a local school village. 15 comments were along this theme, which amounted to 58% of the overall response. Next theme, concerns about the effect of the move on current pupils. 8 comments along this theme, which amounted to 31% of the overall responses. Concerns that a loss of the local village could damage the local community and identity. 7 responses along this theme, which was 27% of the overall responses. Concerns that the school may become oversubscribed after moving to a new site. There was only 1 comment along this theme. And then finally, concerns about whether the new site would be a Church of England school. And there was 1 comment with this theme. Next slide, please, Callum. So this theme is about other comments where we've asked, it was a free text question where respondents had the opportunity to, say anything that they couldn't say earlier. So just to summarize, reinforcement of positive comments, 10 responses to this theme, which was 45% of the overall responses. Reinforcement of negative comments, 5 responses along this theme, which was 23% of the overall comments. Comments about the necessity of the move, 4 responses along this theme, which was 18% of the overall responses. Concerns over the consultation process, 3 responses to this theme, and 14% of the overall responses. Comments about the need for a dedicated school bus for transport to and from the new site. 1 response mentioning this theme, 5%. And then finally, comments from a parent noting that they would rather transfer their children to a different school rather than moving to the new site. There was 1 response with this theme. Next slide, please, Callum. I welcome any questions. Thanks, Callum.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Marsha. And I think, the consultation shows that the majority of people are happy with Wilby Primary School moving to the new Glenvale Park site. Of course, this is coming to executive, I think it's 2 weeks today, isn't it? I think. So I will be there presenting this report. So I welcome comments and opinions, please. So I've got Wendy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's overwhelmingly supportive, the comments from the consultation. The only query I've got, it says on summary of responses that there was a perception of no safe walking routes to Glenville Park from Wilby. Is there a safe walking route or not, or is it just a perception?
There is a safe walking route, but it's a very long walking route. I've actually walked the route myself, and it is long. There isn't a quick route, but there is a safe route.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when you say long, how far roughly?
So it took Joe and I 1 hour from Wilby to walk to Glenvale.
Yeah, so not really a reasonable walking route to school. No, thank you very much. Answer my question.
Thank you, Wendy. Lee.
Thanks, Chair. So what's the what is the way? So we saw on there that there's 65% of people that responded were concerned about how their children were going to get from their homes to the new school. An hour clearly isn't acceptable, I wouldn't think. So what are the solutions? How do those children get there? Is there a bus route?
So we are gonna be exploring that. So I have put that as an action plan. On the back of the decision that's going to be made in a couple of weeks, we will look at options for transport dependent on the need. Because my understanding is there's a very small number of families from Wilby that go to Wilby. The majority, which is some 82 of the families, come from Wellingborough. So before we start to look at transport, which we will look at, we need to understand where those families are coming from. So I almost need to do a mapping exercise of postcodes. But it is something that we have discussed with the team.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And Chair, if I can ask one more. So yeah, as Councillor Brackleby said, it's overwhelming. I wonder if to even strengthen the case further when this goes to executive, I look at, so if we look at all the respondents there, there are some respondents that obviously have skin in the game, that have a bigger investment, and those respondents are the parent, carer, guardians, the members of staff, and the pupils. So actually, there was a slide, I didn't get a chance to write the numbers down. There was a slide that said what percentage of just those three groups were positive. If we actually find the average of that will strengthen the case to executive, because it's going to be something like 65-75% of that invested group are pro, and I think that's a valid statistic to have, because it just strengthens an already strong case.
Yeah.
Superb. Thank you for that, Lee. Neil.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the transport question. As part of the interview process, when we were looking at the applications, the school were very clear that they wanted to support their families to access the new site, and so I think they would want to be contributory to helping us, helping their families to access the site. So this won't just fall back on the homeschool transport budget, which is, as colleagues will know, under some pressure at the moment. I think there is a real willingness within the school and within the local authority to work in partnership to make that happen. And it is worth noting, as an aside, that some families that access Wilby actually live closer to Glenvale than they do to Wilby because of the spread, and so it will affect families differentially. And as Marsha says, we need to do a little mapping exercise to see who would be adversely affected and how that they can be supported either through public transport or through other routes. So yeah, that's a really good question, something that we have taken up right from the start, and not something that we're coming to late in the process. It was all part of the interview process. So hopefully that's positive. And just to go back to the previous point, I agree entirely. And I think it was interesting that if you look at the staff alone, it was well over 90% of the staff of the school who know the school very well, and are who generate the feeling within the school that parents value so much, were confident that the move to Glenvale would support them in meeting the needs of the pupils even more effectively. So I think that's a really powerful statement.
Superb. Thank you, Neil. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, it's a consultation, not a referendum, but all the same, it's very pleasing to see that the vast majority of respondents agree with the senior leadership team and presumably governors. Do they have governors at that school? At any rate, yes, they do. Okay, it's very good to see that that's happening. Just a question, and this may not be answerable, I don't know, but is there any impression that any of the families will move their children away from the school as a result of the move? And is there any impression that other children from other schools may start to go to the Glenvale Park site because it's more convenient for them?
Okay, so to answer your first question, no, that's not something that I've heard, and I've been in contact with the school on this. I haven't heard anything. I don't think my colleagues have either.
I think there was one who has replied on the questionnaire, wasn't there, that they would rather remove their child from the school. So yes, I think there was at least one.
There was one.
Yeah.
But that's only come through on the consultation. That hasn't been muted to the school at all. Well, it may have been, but it hasn't come to me. And then to answer your second question, the hope would be no, that it won't, the relocation won't affect other schools locally. That's the hope.
Okay. If sorry, if I could just add to that. Clearly, parents have the choice, and to express a preference, and there are other schools within the area. So if there were parents who decided that move was not best for them, we would want to support them in accessing the school that they wanted to, if at all possible. So I just want to say that we would be supportive of talking to parents if that was the case. But as colleagues have said, that's not something that's come through strongly at all.
Fair enough. It would just be a bit sad if it impacted on Little Harrowden, for example, who were the others who had expressed an interest. Of course, one hopes that wouldn't be the case, but obviously it's up to parents, as you say, Neil.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's parental choice, isn't it? Where they send their child. So superb, thank you. I shall take those comments back a couple of weeks' time. So we move on to, I'm going to go on to item 7, which is the forward lists for the EAP. This was circulated today, I think it was, or was it late last night? Callum, sorry. do you want to go through that?
Yeah, I'll pass this one over to David. I think he's
sorry,
going to take
David.
us through it. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. Let me just try and bring that up because I think it's much better if we've got it to view. Hold on. Sorry, this is one of those bits about Zoom and knowing where you can do things on it. Hold on. Right. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Okay, so for members, I mean, obviously I'm new to this EAP, but what I am doing is supporting 2 other EAPs. So as well as supporting future communities, I support active communities and prosperous communities as well. And we have worked with the chairs of each of those on the back of the refreshed EAPs to explore how do we develop the forward plans, how do we make sure that what is coming to the EAP is very much about strategy development, understanding the challenges across the different services, and then deciding what are the key agenda items that need to come to the EAP moving forward. So what you'll see before you is a standard format that we now use in the 2 EAPs. What it enables us to do is try and manage the finite number of meetings that we've got and make sure that you as members are seeing the items that you really need to. So if I just take you through it and then I'll seek any questions or comments from members after that. So what we've tried to do is effectively break it down into, in the terms of reference for EAPs, all of these areas on the left-hand side are effectively named within these are possible areas for the EAP to consider. Just to help members understand what that means is, well, not all of them fall under the exec member for children's services, Councillor Edwards. Some of them fall under Councillor Harrison, because they might be with regards to employment and skills, adult ed, etc. In the loose language which was in the terms of reference. So just helps you to understand which assistant directors, which directors, and which exec member are responsible for those. What we've also found is that sometimes we try and do too much in an EAP, and what that means is you don't get the opportunity to really share your thoughts, properly engage with the subject, and we find that it's generally helpful if we try and minimize the items to 2, possibly 3, dependent on the complexity of them or the amount of discussion that may happen as a result of that. What we've also found helpful in the other EAPs is, if you look on the 11th of January there, we've got item 3, service presentation. and having the opportunity for a bit of dedicated time for the assistant directors to talk about their service areas, the things that are challenging them, the things which are coming up in the future that they will want to bring forward, new strategies, new ways of working that will be of a real interest to EAP members, I think provides a opportunity for you to think about, actually, yes, we'd like to look at that, or we'd like to know more about that. So can we fit that into our forward plan for the rest of the year? So on this page, what you can see is that we've got a forward plan up until the 2nd of May at the moment for next year, and that's just primarily because we're working with the municipal year. But it effectively means we've got 2 more meetings within this municipal year in which to consider what we're doing. So the next meeting in January has already got 2 items proposed to be brought forward. So one around speech and language provision, and the second around the school examination results. However, what we have suggested is that we put a service presentation in there, so that, and I'd start off by saying, let's do assistant directors, because you'll get a very high level about what fits under them. But what you may say is, well, actually, in the same way that you have done today, we'd like to get Charlotte in and talk a little bit about special educational needs, and we'd like to focus on this or that moving forward. What we've also provided in there, just to give you the headlines around what happens within those service areas, is we've asked Neil and Susan just to provide a bit of a summary of what their service area is, policies and strategies that are in development and are likely to come forward over the next few months or years, and areas of transformation that they are thinking about, but aren't that far advanced that you would just be rubber stamping something. It's an opportunity for you to debate and discuss in greater detail in that sense. So you've got a bit of a summary there for Neil's area, and then for Susan's area as well. Clearly we couldn't get a picture of Susan, so we've just shouted children's services there instead. I'm going to get a picture of you, Susan, by the way. I know you're on there. So, but it just gives you a bit of an idea around the sorts of areas where you might want to say, well, actually, there's real value in bringing that forward to a future meeting. So it's just adding a bit of structure to what we do in the EAPs and really focusing. You clearly cannot do all of these in a year. So it's about the assistant directors having the opportunity to say, I think these are the most important things that we need to be discussing over the next municipal year, and we will start looking ahead to next year's municipal year. And I know members of EAPs can change, but the business of EAPs will continue. So it's important that we are thinking ahead and are informing the forward plans, so that when we do bring things forward, they're not done last minute. You get a real opportunity to engage with them properly, but you're also getting them early enough so that it's not a fait accompli which is being brought to you, because that's certainly not the intention of EAPs. It's about informing strategy, informing transformation, and giving an elected member viewpoint, which helps our exec members then to give a wider perspective of the views of the council. So we just wanted to bring that forward and share it with you. I obviously don't expect you to have read it in any great detail because of only being circulated today, but it would be really helpful in planning the future meetings moving forward if we could potentially agree to have a bit of a service, one of the service presentations where either Neil or Susan talks through in a bit more detail their areas. They might want to bring some of the people that lead on those areas to talk in a bit more detail about it, to enable you to think about, well, future plan over the remaining part of this year. This is what we'd like to cover. But also going into next municipal year, these are some of the priorities that we'd like to pick up on. So happy to take any questions. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see you. There we go. Over to you, Chair.
Superb. Thank you very much for that, David. And thank you for the presentation. I've got Wendy.
Thank you, David. I haven't read all of it, but I did skim read it, what was sent over this afternoon. So, and I thought it was really helpful to kick off some ideas. And I would be very interested to look at the school attendance strategy that's being developed. My understanding is that since COVID, nationally, not just in North Northamptonshire, school attendance has fallen. So I'd be really interested to see that. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Wendy. I mean, it is something that I know we've talked about separately, maybe not in the EAP, not we as in me and you, as in Children's Services. And I know also it's a government target now, isn't it, about school attendance on increasing it. So that would be a great topic to actually bring forward. Anybody else?
Sorry, Chair, if I could just come in there, it's what would probably be really helpful is if we could give some sort of indication at what stage we will have effectively the skeleton for the strategy. So not the completed element, but the skeletons that we can then bring it to EAP at a date around that in the future. So for each of these strategies, if I can maybe put Neil and Susan on task to say, actually, can you give us a bit of an indication about when you would want it to come forward? So it's important to Councillor Brackenbury, and I'm sure it's important to others. So if it's, would be in time for January or May of next year, it's just helpful so that we can start building it into the forward plan moving forward. So not expecting you to do it today, but if perhaps we could update this with indicative dates of when we think we'll have the skeletons ready for them, so that we can then bring it forward for a really good discussion with elected members.
Superb. Thank you, David. Jean.
Thank you. Linking into Wendy's attendance, could we have the homeschool, the number of students opting for a homeschool as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess with the homeschool education, we could look at numbers, we could look at how we support those children and kind of like the guidelines around home education.
Yeah, but I'm saying, Chair, it could be done at the same time as the attendance.
Yep. Anything else?
Just if I could say, Chair, I think that's it's a really good suggestion about the sorts of things that we'd like to cover within those, because quite often what we've got is one line or a request that says we'd really like to look at, but actually packaging them together so that you get one, you can almost theme the particular EAPs that you've got around a particular subject, which enables you to see the relationships between the two in that sense. So I think that's really a really helpful suggestion, Councillor Addison.
Perfect, thank you. And it doesn't just close today. So if you get home, well, you're probably home now, but if you go to bed tonight and suddenly have a thought, oh, I'd really like to kind of understand that, as always, drop me an email or give me a ring or give me a text, and then I can speak to David and Neil and Susan and get it onto the forward plan. Excellent. So I think that's everything this evening. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and enjoy